Today, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity, specifically what is good for local governments, community members, and internet service providers to be aware of when it comes to the intersection of cybersecurity and broadband planning and safety. We hope you take away the level of detail you need for your plans. And please remember, as a webinar designed for a wide spectrum of organizations participating in this program, from county governments and COGS to ISPs and others in between, some of the information will be good to know on a high level for some, and for others, there will be more implementing and writing on the topic. And with that, I'll pass it off to Megan and Sarah to both introduce themselves and to get us started on key cybersecurity considerations for digital equity and broadband planning. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarah. It is so great to be here with you all today. So just quickly introducing kind of what to expect for today's webinar. As Sarah kind of mentioned, the purpose of today's webinar is to help you understand the significance of cybersecurity and also how to leverage it within your digital equity planning and future funding opportunities. So a couple of the topics we'll go through today. We'll start off with why cybersecurity, why is it important? We'll also go through what exactly do you need to know pertaining to this topic? And we'll kind of wrap up with ways that you can leverage this knowledge today. As Sarah mentioned, we are with Learn, Design, Apply, a grant consulting and writing firm. I am Sarah Rezac, a funding strategist, and then Megan is our director of broadband program. So with that, I will turn it over to Megan.
Thank you, Sarah. As Sarah said, we have some exciting things to cover today. I'm going to kick it off to set the stage a bit about cyber attacks, responses, and what it all means. So if you want to go to the next slide, Sarah. So first off, want to, in context, kind of put forward that cybersecurity is digital equity. So I think everyone attending this webinar has some degree of knowledge about digital equity and what it means, the condition in which all individuals and communities have the information technology capacity needed for full participation in our society. So what does this mean with cybersecurity? Well, putting it in context, a recent IBM study showed that 95% of cyber breaches are caused by human error. So if you think of it like this, to utilize in an equitable way this technology, you have to understand cybersecurity. You have to understand the risks and how to mitigate them. If you don't have that knowledge, you don't have digital equity. So next slide. I'm going to back it up a step here and do a background. So what are cyber attacks? When we're talking about this, what do we even mean? So a cyber attack is any intentional effort to steal, expose, alter, destroy data applications or other assets through unauthorized access to network, computer system, or digital device. So that's a very long explanation there, but it covers that it is a broad spectrum. Who does this? So there's a few main organizations, which is criminal organizations, state actors, and private persons are kind of the three main sources we see for cyber attacks. So when we talk about state actors, those are usually organizations that are associated with countries outside of the United States when we're looking at cyber attacks within this country. Why do people do these cyber attacks? So the main reasons for cybercrime: criminal, personal, political. So financial gain is a driving force behind all of this. When you're seeing cyber attacks, you know, what we hear in the news and what we think about is information being held hostage and demands of Bitcoin, all these kind of financial gain components. But there is also a personal and political aspect to cybercrime as well, both of which have been rising in our recent times. Next slide. So how do these cyber attacks affect us? So we know what they are, we know how they happen and who is doing it. We're going to talk about three main parties here: local government, internet service providers, and then you and me, everyone on this webinar. So cyber attacks affect local government because they pose a risk to public safety, to the operating services, financial loss, and stolen data. So that's a very big one that we hear about as well, is the risk of stolen data and what does that mean? So ransomware, some facts on this. Ransomware attacks on state and local governments last on average 7.3 days, and downtime alone generates an average loss of $64,000. So a lot can be affected by this. And again, these incidents have been happening more and more in recent years, and local government, especially smaller governments, historically have not been main targets. But again, that is increasing and we're seeing that increase. So there is a risk. Internet service providers, obviously with all this digital equity and broadband, the work that everyone has been doing here, ISPs are a big part of it. So similarly, cyber attacks on ISPs cause downtime, data loss, and money loss. This year, the telecom industry has been the second most breached business sector. So that's a lot of risk, a lot of data, a lot of money loss. For businesses, and this is not just ISPs, but thinking businesses in general, the average breach results in 1.42 million in lost business. And then the average ransom payment is $812,000. So obviously a big jump from what we see at local government. But still, these are serious things. You and me. So if we're the victims of a cyber attack, what does that mean? Often we see the loss of money, of personal information, financial, medical information. A lot of times people who are receiving a personal cyber attack will have blocked access to their accounts, to their devices, to their information, and will have a payment demand of them. Next slide, Sarah. So it's not all doom and gloom. I know I just described a pretty bleak picture out there, but part of the reason we're here and part of the reason we're doing a lot of this work is to get better. So these incidents aren't so terrible. Some good news, in 2023, 99% of state and local governments got all encrypted data back. Fantastic statistic there. These incidents happen, but there's a great recovery. Also great, the federal government recently in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act dedicated money to help local governments recover from cyber attacks when they happen. So again, showing this interest in recovery and making sure that when these incidents happen, we can get back on our feet from them, especially with local government. Internet service providers. So similarly, grant programs are now requiring a lot more cyber security measures, which is Sarah's going to get into very shortly here. But making sure that people who are receiving federal money are also doing a lot to protect themselves. And the more we protect, the more we have cyber plans, the more we have in place, the better we are at preventing these incidents. You and me, we're attending this webinar, right? In addition to that, there are numerous free resources for individuals available for protection and education. We're starting to see a lot more efforts to educate community, which again is something we'll talk on shortly. But it is getting better. We're in a climate, in an environment where we're seeing improvement in knowledge on cybersecurity for individuals. Next slide. So I wanted to jump into some of the funding. I mentioned there's local funding, there's different government funding. A big one is the State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program. So this is through the Department of Homeland Security, and the applicants are state and territories. So for 2 years, states and territories have been receiving funds to help their communities with cybersecurity. 80% of the funds that the states get have to go to local government, and 25% of those funds must go to rural areas. So the cost share, it depends by state, and it also depends by what year in this program they're at. So this is going to be a 4-year program. So we're in the second year now. The states are taking this in a few different approaches. Some states, such as Pennsylvania, have a list of services that you can ask them. You can subscribe to, that they will help you. They have set criteria, a set menu of what they offer, and are using their funds to then provide those services if they are requested by local government. Other states, such as North Carolina, Oklahoma, are doing grant programs. So in these cases, similar to many grant programs, they're accepting applications from local government that have different solutions or different requests, different planning opportunities, and then doing a competitive program where they will review and then award this money to local government. So each state is doing it differently. Each state is in a different timeline. So North Carolina finished their grant program earlier this year. Oklahoma is going to be opening theirs in the summer or fall. So I definitely encourage anyone on here to get in touch with the state that you're in, that you're working in, that you live in, and see what they're doing with their funds. Reach out and see how you can be a part of things. And certainly if they are having services that are for you, subscribe. It is a fantastic opportunity for local government to get up to speed on something that often doesn't have a lot of resources put towards it. Next. So Digital Equity Act. So as I mentioned at the beginning, cybersecurity is digital equity. So we have coming up a few different programs. I'm going to talk about two of them here. We have the Digital Equity Grant Program and the State Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program. So this is a competitive program that will be hosted by NTIA, this first one, that is open to a variety of applicants. They're listed out right there. And this will be across the nation. So it's competitive across any organization in our country or territories. The second program is just for states. So they are getting money to then implement activities from their digital equity plan. Similar to the state and local cybersecurity grant funding, each state has been doing different things. This has been talked about a lot, so I'm sure many on the webinar are aware of these programs and what states might be doing. But it is then an opportunity. There's 1.44 billion for states that's been divided. This is already in a set formula. We call it a formula grant. So they know exactly how much each state is getting. And then 1.25 billion over 5 years. So 1.25 billion sounds like a lot, but when you divide it over 5 years, it does become a bit smaller. There is a cost share for the Digital Equity Grant Program, the competitive one, which is 10%. And you can do a wide range of projects. But what we have been hearing from NTIA on this is that partnerships are critical. So standalone applications from one entity are not going to be very competitive at all. So in other programs, we have seen those successful, not on this one. Because there is a limited amount of funds, they are looking to see more robust programs put together that are addressing the digital divide. But we include this one here because, again, as stated, cybersecurity is digital equity. And then I think our next slide, we'll pass it over to Sarah, who again is going to talk about some of these requirements that were mentioned earlier that ISPs and other applicants need to meet for BEAD funding.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Megan. Yeah, so I'm just essentially going to take you through what exactly do you need to know about cybersecurity. So this will kind of provide a high-level overview of kind of the details and the technical side of cybersecurity. And as I'm going through this, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat, because I know that cybersecurity can be quite a complex topic to discuss. But we are here to simplify it and help you understand kind of those pieces that you will need to know. So starting off, as Megan mentioned, NIST is one of the very important government organizations that you need to have an awareness of. So NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They were established in 1901 within the Department of Commerce. And I do want to point out that they have a current annual budget of roughly $1.5 billion. So quite a hefty funding amount. In 1972, they started their cyber work, which is really where NIST becomes important for us. They started developing cybersecurity guidance, and then additionally cyber supply chain risk management best practices, which I'll define in a second. As we have kind of established throughout this webinar, cybersecurity really is a growing threat to national security. And so that's why we're kind of seeing that push with kind of on the federal side with having this compliance with cybersecurity. One of the big attacks that happened recently was in 2021 with the Colonial Pipeline. And within like an hour, these ransomware attackers were able to get roughly like 100 gigabytes of data. And so cyber attacks happen very fast and they can be very, very extreme. And so with that, under Biden's administration, there has been a large push for cybersecurity, especially within these upcoming grant programs and opportunities. So kind of that question, so what? Why do we need to know about NIST, and what do we need to know from NIST? The most important thing is the cybersecurity framework. And so kind of moving on to kind of developing an understanding of the cybersecurity framework. This first was established in 2014. Over the past couple of years, they've put out their version 1.1, and then also started with the version 1.0. They've collected a lot of feedback from the community through public commenting processes, and developed a lot of additional resources as that feedback has come in. And we currently have the version 2.0, which was recently released. As I mentioned, there's a lot of great resources from NIST that go into this that I'll introduce later in my slides. But a big push that they've kind of had with this change is including governance. So kind of at a high level, the NIST cybersecurity framework provides guidance to industries, government agencies, and other organizations to manage cybersecurity risks. It offers a taxonomy of high-level cybersecurity outcomes that can then be used by any organization. And I do want to put emphasis on that. This is very beneficial for every single organization, regardless of size, sector, or maturity. And the CSF is used to better understand, assess, prioritize, and communicate the organization's cybersecurity efforts. So moving into the plan itself, what exactly is the cybersecurity framework? So as I mentioned in that previous slide, there's kind of a couple different focus areas that NIST breaks down of areas of importance. So these include governance, identifying risk, protecting against risk, detecting, responding, and recovering from attacks. And these are further broken down within the plan into kind of different objectives that your organization can meet. And it's the nice thing is with this structure, it makes it pretty easy when developing your plans by saying, okay, yes, we do this. Yes, we can implement this. And just kind of developing that NIST compliant plan. So I do want to mention that there are three main parts. So the core, which kind of includes these elements, and then profiles and tiers, which I'll break down in a second. So something that I do want to highlight before jumping into kind of the details of the CSF is the fact that cyber supply chain risk management is becoming a huge piece of cybersecurity efforts. So if you are not familiar with the term, cyber supply chain risk management is where you are able to identify what cyber risk exists within a supply chain and then how you manage those risks. So within the CSF specifically, there are a couple pieces that touch on this topic, but I do want to highlight that within future funding opportunities like the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Grant, we are seeing that applicants, subrecipients will be required to have an actual cyber supply chain risk management plan in place. But that's a huge piece because it kind of addresses the fact that cybersecurity is not just one organization, and it's a whole community in a giant effort. So addressing that on the supply chain level. So breaking down those three parts of the CSF that I mentioned, we first have the core, which is the high-level overview of your organization's cybersecurity outcomes, which kind of comes from those 6 elements that I just described on the last slide. Additionally, there are the CSF profiles. This essentially is just a description of your organization's current stance with cybersecurity and your targeted stance with cybersecurity. So this allows you to kind of do that reflection of, okay, here is exactly where we are at in this moment, and here's where we want to be in the future. And kind of tying into that topic of the profiles, we also have the CSF tiers. So these are provided within the CSF framework in the kind of that NIST publication. But these are kind of areas where you can characterize the rigor of your organization's cybersecurity posture. And the tiers are important because they can kind of address those, okay, what are the gaps? Where do we want to expand our core? And kind of, it can help inform where you want to be in terms of your targeted stance and profile. So kind of diving into those 6 main categories that I mentioned. So the first one is going to be governance. So this is your organization cybersecurity risk management strategy, your expectations for your cybersecurity posture. This will also kind of go into which policies are established, and then how these policies are communicated and monitored as well. Next, we have identify. So this is pretty much ties into your ability to understand your critical activities. And this includes your hardware and your software, so keeping inventory lists, also recognizing which threats and vulnerabilities target your organization specifically. And then the last kind of piece of identify is having an understanding of the different roles and responsibilities within your organization. So this can include director level and also go down kind of to the individual level as well with every single position. Next up, we have protect, which is your ability to manage access to assets and info, kind of your approach to protecting sensitive data, and then also protecting devices. And this kind of ties in as well to employee training. So kind of what initiatives you're taking to inform your employees of the best practices with cybersecurity and develop that knowledge of the evolving threats that target your organization. Next up, we have detect, which is essentially what it sounds like, your ability to test and update your detection processes. This will include maintaining logs of kind of all the threats that are detected, and having a pretty in-depth understanding of your data flows. After that, we have your ability to respond. So this essentially tests your ability to know the different responsibilities in the case of an event. Kind of how frequently you update your cybersecurity plan. And additionally, this is where the cyber supply chain risk management comes in. Response also ties into how you coordinate with your stakeholders and kind of the different individuals that you interact with within that supply chain. And then finally, we have recovery. So these are your plans for resilience, kind of how you manage the PR side of things if there is an event that takes place, and developing a better understanding of your communication structure. So as I mentioned, these are kind of those 6 main elements, and the CSF does a great job of kind of breaking down how you can approach each of these and what NIST is looking at. So as I mentioned, there are plenty of different resources that can help inform you of kind of everything that I just touched on and kind of answer any additional questions and areas of interest that you may have. So the first thing that we have hyperlinked here, and we will send these slides out afterwards, so feel free to reference there. The first area is the Cybersecurity Framework website. NIST has done a great job of kind of providing that overview written down that I just provided to you. They also have a pretty in-depth resource and overview guide that kind of takes you through each of those 3 elements of the CSF and each of those kind of focus areas that they have. They also kind of provide an overview of the different profiles and kind of how to approach assessing your cybersecurity profile. They also have a very useful guide that is curated for small businesses, because small businesses function much different than, say, like government entities. And so NIST has done a great job of ensuring that all of the individuals that will be utilizing the CSF have access to the resources necessary that I explain it within that context. They also have included on that website a pretty in-depth understanding of cybersecurity supply chain risk management and how it ties into the CSF. And then they also have guides for using the CSF tiers, and then additionally kind of approaching risk management from an enterprise standpoint as well. We also want to highlight a few additional resources that are very, very useful that we highly recommend looking into. So the first one is the CISA cross-sector cybersecurity performance goals. Like the CSF, this is kind of a set of best practices that your organization can take for reducing cyber risks. Additionally, CISA has the cyber hygiene services. This is where you'll work directly with CISA to evaluate external network presence. And the great thing about this service is that it provides weekly vulnerability reports, and then also ad hoc alerts if there is a threat that is detected. CISA also has a cyber infrastructure survey, which is kind of a great way to evaluate your current cyber resilience. We also want to highlight that SANS has a website with a lot of cybersecurity policy templates. We totally understand that sometimes when you sit down to address these things, you might not know where to start. This is a great website that has all of a comprehensive list of templates that you can utilize and integrate within your cybersecurity plan and your organizational policies as well. And then finally, we want to highlight the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. This essentially allows you to coordinate with other entities and kind of address growing threats and risks, and builds that community around like knowledge sharing and stuff like that. So kind of tying back to the big picture, I know there was a lot of technical pieces that I just went over, but we want to answer that, kind of tie back to that, so what? So say you want to make sure that your community is cyber safe. From the information that I just shared, one way that you can start is getting in touch with your local CISA rep. And we do want to highlight that the CISA reps are wonderful, and they are always happy to set up meetings with you and discuss kind of your cyber stance. We also, from kind of making sure your community is cyber safe, you can also get in touch with digital equity practitioners, and then additionally cybersecurity professionals. So kind of building that network and building kind of your understanding of your organization and getting that feedback of the best approach. And from here, you will find your cyber ecosystem that will create a strategy to educate and support your community. And so I do want to tie it back to one of the big points that Megan made in the first couple of slides. The fact that cybersecurity is digital equity. I love that on that slide she mentioned that it's important to utilize technology in an equitable way where individuals understand how to do it safely. And so with cybersecurity, informing your community and having these policies in place that help protect community members, it ensures that technology is being utilized in that equitable way. So with that, I'll pass it back to Megan, and she can kind of provide an overview of kind of that, where we're seeing cybersecurity compliance.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. So as I believe Sarah pointed out, and I mentioned earlier, cybersecurity has been a big component of many of the programs coming out from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So the BEAD funded grant programs, we know that having a cybersecurity plan and a CSCRIM is a requirement. We're also seeing this in power and grid grants, in water infrastructure grants, in resiliency grants, and in smart city grants. It looks a little bit different across of these. So some of them, like BEAD, are requiring applicants to have this to verify that they do. And others are saying, once you're awarded, we're going to come and check up on you and make sure you do have it. So sometimes it's a before the grant, sometimes it's an after the grant, but regardless, there is a big emphasis. And you'll note across these ones that are mentioned, they all have to do with technology. They all have to do with internet connectivity. So thinking of this, looking at BEAD, we learned a lot. Want to talk about how you can leverage this knowledge for BEAD. So I know for many folks on here, and I will say we do see some questions and we're very excited to answer them. If you want to go to the next slide, Sarah. Many people, many counties, many cities, communities putting together digital equity plans, as well as broadband strategic plans. Many of our public sector friends may not be an end provider. They may not be an applicant for a BEAD program. So how can all of this knowledge be helpful? It can be helpful in deciding who you support. So if you're not going after it, many an ISP will probably be reaching out. How do you know what partner you should suggest or you should go with, provide a letter, etc.? There's some things that you can ask them. So do they have a plan in place, right? Do they participate in training? They're probably not going to give you their entire cybersecurity plan because that would be a cyber risk for them, but they, I'm sure, should be happy to talk about it. And if they're not happy to talk about it, that should be a little warning sign for you. If you're looking, if you have some competition between folks who are coming to you and wanting your support, you can leverage this. Say, we will give you our letter of support. We'll want you as our provider here. Can you provide cybersecurity insights and training to our community as a part of this? What can you offer us to make sure our community is cyber safe? So, kind of using your position to get those benefits for your community from a provider. As well, you can ask them, can they provide insights and training to the local government? So I know there was a question about how can we address some of these things if there aren't funds there, if we don't have a cybersecurity person on staff. Certainly asking the ISP who is interested in serving your community, or even who is already serving your community, what can they do for you as a government in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of talking about it, helping you assess what you have or what you don't have, and where you can improve. So jumping now to questions. So we have a few, and I'm excited to get into them. I will address first, we have one in our Q&A, clarifying how a local government can test its detection process. So for this, what we would say is that there are a lot of companies that you can hire that either provide resources that you can implement yourself, your IT department, or you can have a company that focuses on cybersecurity and they can help you do tests. So what they'll do is what they call penetration tests, where they'll see kind of how easily they can get into your system. They'll do phishing tests. Phishing is one of the biggest ways in which bad cyber actors get into systems is through clicking on incorrect links, through cyber risks there. So again, there's resources where you can buy and implement these for yourself, or you can hire cybersecurity companies to help you do that. I would say there's benefits to each, and it does come down to sometimes a matter of cost, but certainly is doable, and those would be our two main ways in which you can look at doing that. And I would certainly say your IT department is probably already doing some of this. Same with the local internet service providers. So they have the firewalls, they'll be doing the penetration testing. So your IT department certainly reach out and say, hey, what are we doing in this regard? And they probably have a lot of information, and I find are also always very excited to talk about cybersecurity. So it could be that your organization, your local government is doing more than you may already know. And if not, you can come to them and say, some resources. I will go back to what Sarah was pointing out about CISA. CISA, those are free resources. The agents there, when they talk to you, absolutely free. And they can provide great insight as well onto some of those finer details of what might be the best solution for you. So I think we had another that came through on the chat. How do I test for vulnerabilities if I don't have a cyber person or staff? So again, for this, Sarah, I don't know if you want to take this one. I'm happy to do that as well. Want to give you a chance. Both
Yes.
Sarah and I can easily talk about cybersecurity for a while.
Oh,
I'll
yes.
let Sarah answer.
So definitely, as Megan was kind of saying, and that's kind of a point I wanted to make with the last question as well, reaching out to CISA. They are wonderful. They have great resources, and especially that cyber hygiene service, that will definitely help you scan for those vulnerabilities. And so we highly recommend kind of reaching out there and setting up those conversations. And so that's kind of a great place to kind of start and begin. And so Megan, if you want to expand further on that.
Yeah, absolutely. CISA, again, great starting resource. I would also talk to your IT person, again, see what they're doing. And if you are here and you are the IT person, I would certainly say there is, again, talking to CISA, there are a lot of great resources on different companies, including smaller companies that work better with smaller budgets, that can help put this stuff together, that are well-versed, well-practiced in this area. And so getting in touch with some of those, and again, seeing what your ISP friends can do for you, certainly is something to explore, and it never hurts, and you never know what you find from those conversations. I've certainly learned. Okay, so we have a few other questions here. I'm going to tackle, there's a second question, and then Sarah, I'm going to put the third question there for you. The second question here is, an ISP working in my community / covering households in my community legally required to tell subscribers if there has been a data breach or other cyber attack? So it depends. So recently the FCC did put out new rules regarding this, outlining when an internet service provider has to report data breaches. Within that, it defines different levels of data breaches. How serious is this data breach? So for, at the lowest end, it's non-serious data breaches where information was not stolen or looked at in a company that serves 500 people or less. They often don't have to do anything beyond reporting it to the FCC and other government entities such as FBI. If it goes farther than that, the severity goes up, an internet service provider will have 7 days in which they need to report this to the FCC, that this data breach happened, all the information that they have, as well as to other government agencies that will be interested, which includes the FBI and Homeland Security often. And then within 30 days, again, on that scale of how severe it is, within 30 days, they have to inform customers. So that was kind of a long, complicated answer, non-answer that, legally in many cases, they are required to tell you. In some cases, they're not. And there's many data breaches that are happening often that are very small. And so for those ones, typically, we don't hear about them. The only time kind of we start to hear about them is when secure information or personal identified information gets compromised.
Yeah. So do you want me to take the next question, Megan? Do you have anything?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so the next question that we did see come in, what questions are important to ask ISPs before partnering with them on a BEAD or other infrastructure project? And kind of a second part to this question, what evidence do we need to see to know that they are responsibly planning for cybersecurity issues? So kind of tying back to that cybersecurity framework, that is the most important place to start. Because with NTIA and with BEAD, all of the subrecipients are required to have a cybersecurity plan in place that is functional and operational, and additionally a cyber supply chain risk management plan as well. So it's very, very important to ask them, how do you comply with the cybersecurity framework, and kind of all the other kind of publications and guidances that NIST has put out. It's kind of important to see their stance, where they're kind of looking to grow, and gain an understanding of, okay, like how long have they been doing this and how intentional have they been with their efforts? And so the nice thing about the cybersecurity framework, because it is pretty detailed, it can provide a lot of areas kind of questions that you can ask them. So for example, if there's a specific area within recovery or response that you're very interested in as a government, that would be a great way to kind of take those recommended practices and ask them specifically, what are you doing for this? So another area that we highly recommend kind of looking into is how they are training their users. And so as Megan was saying, most of the cyber attacks are because of human error, and that can be as simple as phishing. And so definitely looking into what efforts they're doing to inform and educate their community on the risks of cyber attacks and how they can better be prepared for handling those and making sure that they are being safe. So definitely to kind of tie back, first off, really look at how they are complying with the NIST guidances, including the cybersecurity framework, and additionally kind of seeing where they're offering those digital equity efforts in their community as well. So I can either pass it to Megan for another question or to expand on what I just said.
I might tag on to that, Sarah, and I think you kind of high level touched on it. When you're asking them about their cybersecurity plan, ask when they last updated it. We're working with a lot of clients and helping them prepare for BEAD, as many of the people on this webinar are. And many ISPs have said, yeah, we have a plan, and you look at it and it was last updated in 2018. And cybersecurity issues have changed drastically from now until from 2018. I mean, we had a whole pandemic where everyone was working from home. So if they haven't updated their plan since 2018, that can be a sign to keep in mind of, you know, how focused are they on cybersecurity? So ideally, right, they update it periodically, annually at a minimum is ideal. But those are some of the questions of, you know, not only do you have it, but how often are you updating it, you know, and how directly does it align with that NIST framework that Sarah went over? That it's not just, you know, here's the thing we do, and they can't point to whether it's a recovery action or an identify action, right? So how closely do they understand that framework? Because BEAD does say it has to be with the NIST 2.0 cybersecurity framework. So if they start talking about something else, bring them back to NIST, because that's what they got to match. So yeah, I wanted to dig down and ask when they last updated there, because that's another good sign and indicator for you. I'm going to jump to the question here. Are there areas of local government that are more prone to cybersecurity attacks? Yes and no. So I'm reiterating that most cyber attacks are caused by human error. And so these are usually phishing attacks. There's even things such as spear phishing, where they get very pointed in who they're sending the phishing to, as opposed to sending that to, you know, everyone in the local government. So they will do a government-wide phishing to as many emails as they can find, just to see who clicks, right? On the hopes that one of these masses of people will click on the link that will then allow them to get into the system. What I will say in terms of areas of local government is that once they're into the system, they do tend to focus on different areas that they're going to look at. So they're going to look to see how much personally identifiable information they can get, They're going to look at what will be the most disruptive. So can they shut down some sort of public security system that will mean, you know, you're not getting your recordings out, you're not getting text messages for security out, you're not able to communicate with police or emergency personnel. They're going to look for those very disruptive things. Because again, it's another opportunity to make a big attack and get more information. But typically, again, what they're trying to do is get money. So, you know, whatever is the biggest threat to a city, they'll grab onto. And typically we see those two things as gathering personal information or causing some sort of major disruption to city infrastructure. And then I think we have a question here. If my county government partners with an ISP, how do we protect ourselves from any liability from an attack? So this will come down to the way in which you put your agreement together. It does relate back to that cybersecurity supply chain risk management. You are a part of the cybersecurity supply chain. You are connected to the ISP that is providing services. So if there's an attack there, there's an attack on you possibly, and vice versa. So what the cybersecurity supply chain risk management does, and some of those resources that Sarah talked about, talks about clauses that you can put into contracts when you are partnering. So we are not legal experts, disclaimer, so don't hold us to that. But certainly I would say looking at the contracts. So when you're partnering, make sure that you have cyber clauses in your contract. And it's kind of a new thing. We don't always see it. We've started as our company putting that into a lot of our contracts as part of our cyber supply chain. So again, making sure that you're protecting yourself legally through whatever binding contract you have with that internet service provider.
And I do want to touch kind of on a higher level as well, within the cybersecurity framework, really looking at how they respond to events, because there is quite a bit about communication. So, I mean, just from a starting off standpoint, if they don't have strong communication and kind of in a nice plan on how they're going to approach that, that definitely is an indicator that, hey, maybe they're not kind of taking that cyber supply chain risk management into mind. And kind of as we've been saying with BEAD, there is going to be a requirement for that separate cybersecurity risk management plan. So it'll be a piece that we're seeing in the cybersecurity framework, but additionally, they are required to kind of go in depth with their approach there. And so I think the first step to protecting yourselves from any liability from an attack is understanding who you're working with and kind of where their thought process is for that. So
I was going to tag on again. Certainly look at cyber insurance. So if you have a cyber insurance broker, they'll also be able to help you determine your liability. Cyber insurance is something that hopefully everyone should have. There's a lot of agencies out there that provide it either as a separate insurance on its own or as part of a comprehensive package. So your insurance advisor should be able to talk to you about the liability as well and how to reduce that for what you have. So I would also say, on top of your lawyer, talk to your insurance agent. All right, do we have any last questions? Well, I will say on the previous slide, Sarah did include our email addresses, and you can also reach out to anyone at Connect Humanity who can put you in touch with us if you want to talk more about cybersecurity, either from your own perspective, an ISP perspective, or how you can be cooperating with an ISP on this issue. We, as I said, love talking about this, and so are happy to have any follow-up discussions to identify things further and hopefully help where we can.
That was a lot of useful information. You both gave us a lot to think about. So thank you, Sarah and Megan, for sharing how we can all be more cybersecurity aware. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out or join us at an open house. Thanks for joining, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. And good luck to everyone in the program working on their plans. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.